younger, I was having suicidal thoughts to the point of actually taking action on it. And now when I look back on it, I'm like, oh my God, like I was terrible to myself. I was absolutely terrible to myself. The and I come to realize that the person that I wanted to kill, the person I wanted to get rid of, is that self-talk that I was having. It wasn't actually this physical being. There's nothing you can do in the physical world to change anything. You have to change yourself first. But I didn't recognize that back then. And I came to recognize that I am not this body. I'm not these thoughts. I am not, any of this stuff. I'm the one who's aware of these things. And if there's anything I want to kill, it's my concept of myself.
Same way a child that grows up in a home where there's a lot of verbal abuse, if he or she gets an opportunity to go to a friend's house and that's not the norm, then they recognize this as strange. That's when they see, oh, this isn't how everybody lives. Because if it's you and and your mom's calling you, not out of anger, but just everyday talk, that MF, that, oh, look at that B, and that's just what you hear all the time in your house. And then you go to visit someone else's home, or their parents give you a ride back from little league practice or volleyball practice, and you see how another parent interacts, that a child can get curious as to really what else is out there. And so I think when you expose children to positive experiences, that opens a gateway for them to see that they can make it out.
As with every hero's journey, you reach that point where it's like you get to the very bottom. And that's that mental resilience piece where I find a lot of value in knowing that this is my own journey. And if I want to get through it, I can see it. I can see the other side. And what I spend a lot of time asking other folks in my own journey is like, tell me about that time where you picked yourself back up. Like, I don't want to hear about all the good stuff. I want to hear about the time where it's like the very bottom. Like, what did you do? What was said? What did you like? What was it that really was that turning point? Because that, to me, is the most interesting and fascinating part of it.
Most people, I would say, are unaware of the fact that they're even having self-talk. Most people are unaware. And if they were to have an uncritical observation of that which is going on within them, they'd be shocked at how unkind they are with themselves and the people around them.
When you have a child and they have a bad experience and they start crying, to pick them up and then acknowledge, how they feel. If something really bad happened to them, acknowledge, wow, that is really unfortunate what happened to you. But what parents do to help them through the difficulty really matters later in life. If a child feels that they have been seen and understood and how they feel it is acknowledged, and then told, this was unfortunate what happened to you and it hurt, but you will get through this. Then they start having that record of your voice in their head.
The reactions that I'm having to what's showing up in my world is actually up to me. And not saying I win at this all the time, but when I find myself and I start becoming aware of what it is that I'm thinking and what I'm saying to myself about myself or another person, I start to recognize that, oh, wait, you're the one who's creating this. You can recreate something different. And that's what allows me to shift and move.
Today, we're going to take a deep dive into something I think is very important because life is always going to challenge, put obstacles and barriers in our way. The question is, how do we continue to strive to work our way through those things? So what we want to really get into today is talking about resiliency and the ability to continue to push forward and to push through. That said, I have a question for the panel here. What do you think is the separator between those who crumble and those who push through when it comes to the challenges in life and just persevering and working their way through it? Vince, I'll come to you first with that question.
Good morning. Good morning. For me, it's really been community. When I think about the challenges and the hardest points in my journey, it's really been around surrounding, well, finding, so being vulnerable, and finding those individuals who are also on a journey of transformation and improvement. I've been very fortunate to have a lot of amazing individuals who've, entered my life. A lot of it's been through my own manifestation and intent, and it's been a really great ride. Every day is a new day, and taking time to have those conversations, reconnect with those individuals, stay in touch with them, and really build that village has been one of my key strategies.
I think that's important. I think that's a very important piece of it when you're still talking about building your village and having those that have your best interest at heart continue to support, and provide that foundation for you. I think that's a critical piece of it. But also, it's important you make yourself open to that, right? Because that's a two-way communication, right? You've got to let them know that you want that support, that
Yeah.
you want that feedback.
Yep. If you're closed off, nothing's going to happen. You're not going to attract that same level of energy.
At 100%, 100%. Jerry, what about you? When we talk about, perseverance and resiliency and just continuing to stick and stay as we have to work through the various challenges we know life throws at us from day to day.
For me, it's about recognizing my oneness with God. Ultimately, that there's an ultimate cause to all that happens, and it's just recognizing that the reactions that I'm having to what's showing up in my world is actually up to me. And not saying I win at this all the time, but when I find myself and I start becoming aware of what it is that I'm thinking and what I'm saying to myself about myself or another person, I start to recognize that, oh, wait, you're the one who's creating this. You can recreate something different. And that's what allows me to shift and move, because I ask myself questions like, well, okay, you're experiencing this. So that implies you want something. And then I go to that thing that I want, not externally, but within myself.
I think that's a question that a lot of people don't throw out enough to themselves. And that is, asking, what role did I play, or what role am I playing in what's transpiring, right? Because there is this ebb and flow of, as Vince mentioned, there's some energy components to it. There's also some accountability pieces to it. And so I really like what you're sharing there, Jerry, about taking that time to reflect back to self and say, it's going this direction, but what am I doing to contribute, push, or guide it in that particular direction?
This is something I actually learned from a psychologist that deals with a lot of international conflicts, civil wars. And what he shared was in relation to our everyday lives, the people who seem to adjust, maybe not easiest, but they make it through some really difficult situations. A lot of it stems from their childhood. He had told us that when you have a child and they have a bad experience and they start crying, to pick them up and then acknowledge, how they feel. If something really bad happened to them, acknowledge, wow, that is really unfortunate what happened to you. But what parents do to help them through the difficulty really matters later in life. If a child feels that they have been seen and understood and how they feel is acknowledged and then told, this was unfortunate what happened to you and it hurt, but you will get through this. Then they start having that record of your voice in their head. So when they're our age and something bad happens to them, or somebody breaks their heart, or whether it's, they lose a job, or their spouse walks out, or they catch their spouse cheating, or they have the acknowledgement of how they feel. It's a valid feeling. And they hear that parent's voice or that grandparent's voice or godparent's voice saying, you will get through this. And sometimes the voice you have in your head is really the only voice you really have hanging on.
Mhm.
Especially if the person that you love walked out, whether, I don't know if it's a justifiable reason, but you lose what you thought was going to be your world, whether it's a career or a person that you love or somebody pass away. You have in your head that voice that tells you how you feel. uh, it's understandable. You have every right to feel that way, but you're going to get through it, and it'll carry you through some dark moments. Because think about the people that we know who have committed suicide, and some of them we knew that they were depressed or well, it was beyond just general anxiety. We knew that they were depressed, and we thought that they got through it, right? We thought that they, that they turned a corner, and little known to us, they hadn't, or maybe they did, and then um, they had another episode of how they were feeling before. And what makes that person different than somebody else who's also had those thoughts and didn't didn't go that extra step to take their life? Uh, I would think a lot of it has to do with a voice in their head saying, "This is a legitimate feeling that I have, and I'm gonna give it another day."
especially in where we are today in society. And the the push for book learning, academic learning, the education side as a form of advancement in all aspects of our personal and professional life. So much of that that missing mental resilience
Mm.
from role models, from be it from parents, obviously as being the first role model, or other family members or other whatnot. We're missing the boat in so much of our culture and so much of our society, to really ensure that those nuggets of support and being, and how are they feeling, and understanding what their feelings are, and recognizing it, and then being able to communicate that and share that and ask for help. We I don't know if you folks have seen, but we had a pretty terrible tragedy here in Hawaii, which made international news. It's very rare, and it was a murder suicide of a family. And as you were talking, I was thinking about that a lot, and the hopelessness that parent must have felt, which is terrible. Terrible.
I actually was thinking the exact same thing about that. And, for that father to be in such a desperate place that he felt the only way out was to not only kill his entire family, but himself and the children as well. And just, it's just so hard to even figure out how you get to that place, from just despair and not feeling like you have a way forward. That said, I want to add this to the question. How do you guys feel that things such as self-esteem, self-worth, self-beliefs play into a mindset like that, or having that resilience to be able to move forward? Jerry, what are your thoughts on that?
I think that's 100% it. A person's concept of self, it can be determined by their reactions to life, and how most people, I would say, are unaware of the fact that they're even having self-talk. Most people are unaware, and if they were to have an uncritical observation of that which is going on within them, they'd be shocked at how unkind they are with themselves and the people around them. Even good people, even seemingly nice, sweet, loving people, if they're not aware, most of their thoughts are the programmings of other people, and they've accepted them as true. And because they've accepted them as true, they now have this conception of themselves and a conception of how they see the world. And self-worth, self-reliance. I think, like I said before, a person recognizing their oneness with with God and the world, you start to realize how much more control you have over over yourself, like what's going on within you. You can't have all that much control of what's going on outside, but but your concept of self is what sits within. You know, what's interesting, when I was younger, a lot younger, I was having suicidal thoughts to the point of actually taking action on it. And now when I look back on it, I'm like, oh my God, like I was terrible to myself. I was absolutely terrible to myself. The and I come to realize that the person that I wanted to kill, the person I wanted to get rid of, is that self-talk that I was having. It wasn't actually this physical being. There's nothing you can do in the physical world to change anything. You have to change yourself first. But I didn't recognize that back then. And I came to recognize that I am not this body. I'm not these thoughts. I am not, any of this stuff. I'm the one who's aware of these things. And if there's anything I want to kill, it's my concept of myself. So I die. So I learned to, as scripture would say, die daily. So, but that's why that happens. At least in my opinion, the reason why things like suicide or murder or anything like that is that person's actually trying to die to that concept that they're holding for themselves. But because most people are projecting, they have to take out outward action in order to take care of what they see as a problem.
Yeah. Yeah, agree. I agree with that. That's a great way to put it, talking about that self-talk and how what it was you really wanted to kill or get rid of wasn't necessarily the physical you. It's that mental piece of it. And, that's where that line gets really thin between what's going on subconsciously versus consciously. And a lot of that self-talk, which is why a lot of people don't understand that it's even there, or the relevance of it is a lot of it is happening subconsciously. So it's not a front of mind kind of thought process. And some pieces and parts maybe, but a lot of it is happening subconsciously. And again, this is that awareness piece for self, is to really start to open yourself up. It's almost like a can, and look inside and say, hey, what are the pieces and parts that are within me, and why do I have this belief? Where is that coming from? Why do I hit myself over the head saying, I'm not worthy of this, I'm not smart enough for that? And that's all rooted in something somewhere in you and in your past and in your past experiences. But that the work to do that, for some people, I think it's just too painful, right? They don't want to go back, which also was almost like a prison, because it also hinders you from being able to cleanly go forward. So it's a real challenging place to be.
It's interesting when you think about that whole death, and you think about the whole, and I've been on a similar, more recent journey of ego death. And I called it ego death because, this whole Phoenix, reborn transformation piece. If you're a follower of a lot of these different heroes' journey, we reference Joseph Campbell, who essentially was the one of the impetuses to chronicle all the different mythologies from around the world. And then he's most notably known because George Lucas and Steven Spielberg decided to create the Star Wars series based off of the hero's journey. So if we're all on our own hero's journey, and we're all going through life's trials and tribulations, and it was as with every hero's journey, you reach that point where it's like you get to the very bottom. And that's that mental resilience piece where I find a lot of value in knowing that this is my own journey. And if I want to get through it, I can see it. I can see the other side. And what I spend a lot of time asking other folks in my own journey is like, tell me about that time where you picked yourself back up. Like, I don't want to hear about all the good stuff. I want to hear about the time where it's like the very bottom. Like, what did you do? What was said? What did you like? What was it that really was that turning point? Because that, to me, is the most interesting and fascinating part of it, because if you were to take all those different components of that transformation piece, that death, and put it together, you'll see a pattern. Guarantee it.
The other piece of that too is you think about people who we know who have had great success in life, but the beginnings were so humble and so challenging. The Oprah Winfrey's of the world, and you hear her childhood story and what she went through, and the different levels of abuse, and so where does that type of resilience come from to be able to continue to push forward from depths so low like that? Is it just a unique character? Is that what it is as far as the individual goes? Or do you think these are things that can be over time taught and learned? And I think that's an important thing for our viewers to figure out. But sometimes I think it's you can grow yourself basically and evolve with some of these skills. Erica, what do you think about that?
I agree. I think a lot of it has to do with exposure, because some children are born into situations where there's just a lot of negativity in their home. They walk outside, there's negativity. They go to school, they don't have some of them may not have the most positive teachers. The teachers come from backgrounds that are negative. The social worker has negative background in her childhood or his child, just a lot of mess. And then when you take that same child and they're exposed to other people with different outlooks, a positive outlook, or just something more optimistic, they're children that are curious about that. And they're curious about how other people live, what's going on in other people's homes. They are sometimes a third teacher comes to town and starts teaching them, and they get just a whole different outlook. Invitation to somebody's church or somebody's mosque, and they the Kingdom Hall, just they get exposed to another side of life. And sometimes there's a curious child that just wants to know, is there something better or something different? Because some people, for example, a child that grows up financially poor and everybody else is broke, that's what they know. They don't know that there's something else. Same way a child that grows up in a home where there's a lot of verbal abuse, if he or she gets an opportunity to go to a friend's house and that's not the norm, then they recognize this as strange. That's when they see, oh, this isn't how everybody lives. Because if it's you and and your mom's calling you, not out of anger, but just everyday talk, that MF, that, oh, look at that B, and that's just what you hear all the time in your house. And then you go to visit someone else's home, or their parents give you a ride back from little league practice or volleyball practice, and you see how another parent interacts, that a child can get curious as to really what else is out there. And so I think when you expose children to positive experiences, that opens a gateway for them to see that they can make it out. But if all a child sees is what's going on inside their house, the abuse, the rape, the sexual abuse, the non-sexual physical abuse, the verbal abuse, if that's what a child sees all the time, then that's just what they're going to copy. And then you do get hopeless. You get hopeless. And that opened up doors to a whole bunch of other types of abuses. So all types of self-abuse.
Yeah, thanks for sharing that. And that's an important one. Another thing too, I think, and especially in this day and age, we're all at an age and we're old enough to appreciate a world before social media. So let's talk about that, the social pressures, and especially how that's now shifted for teens and the tweens, and then even get into your 20s now, of the social media pressures and what that has added on to what can already be a challenging life, from the judgment that's out there and the feeling like, I got to get so many likes, or that impacts my self-esteem. What are your thoughts on that piece of it, Erica, with the social media pressures?
A lot of articles talk about girls and the way girls are affected by social media. But from what I've been observing and what I've been hearing, it's having a horrible impact on boys
Mm-hmm.
and young men, and the impact it is having to their mental health. I can't even imagine being a elementary, middle school, high school, college male and seeing what's on social media and the way uh, social media projects the way life is supposed to be upon males, how they should act, how they should, what they should own, what they should do, their relationships with women, their relationships with men. But I mean, it's just so much bad stuff. And so I was just wondering how does someone who consumes all of that, especially a younger person, how do they protect themselves from what has to inevitably be depression? Social media
Mhm.
throws a whole bunch of junk at people in regards to how they should feel, how they should look, what they should have. I'm like, young people should just be allowed to be themselves and be free, enjoy life, instead of being told what they should like. You know what I'm saying? That's we're in social media, we're telling people what they should like
Yeah.
instead of letting them explore and experience by just being away from the computer, away from the phone. Go and have fun. Go get in the water. Go hiking. Go hunt. Go whatever. Go experience life.
Yeah, the whole keeping up with the Jones kind of concept with social media. If you haven't watched that documentary, The Social Dilemma, um, I watched it, and it was quite eye opening to the point where I was ready to delete all my social media accounts.
Mhm.
It's it's fascinating to think about. Um, this being the baseline for all kids. It's a double-edged sword. On one hand, the accessibility of information and knowledge has never been so great. On the other hand, is this is where myself as a parent of young kids has really had to challenge, what Erica mentioned, which is it's about showing them and letting them experience what life is like without social media, without technology. So they have a choice, and the choice is not one or the other, or good or bad, or fun or not fun. It's just enjoying things and seeing things for a different lens. It's always a fun thing when I take my kids camping, because my youngest loves it. I love it. My middle child is like, oh, there's resistance. And for me, it's like, okay, I need to change this strategy. So I was asked why doesn't he like camping, and he listed all these things. I'm like, okay, fine. If you want all those things, you can do all those things camping, but it's just not going to be it's going to be in a different environment. And I made a big what if, and it worked. I changed the way I was thinking about it so that I could accommodate what he wanted, and it worked. Whereby he rarely touched his phone. He was out finding sticks and sword fighting with sticks and digging holes and playing at the beach. And he had a jolly time. But the thing about it is, I realized that I was trying to control. I was trying to assert my own. I was trying to make him see this, and it did not work.
Very interesting. Jerry, you have young ones at home too. And I'm sure as a father, you see what's happening in the landscape and the opportunity that's in front of them, which is the positive things and also some of the negative or challenging things as they grow. What are your thoughts, and what have you started to even plant those seeds already as to what you want their futures to look like?
I mean, Vince said it right there. Part of the decision to move to Hawaii and live rurally was partially because of my paranoia of all this media.
Yeah.
And I recognized that it was super important for my son. Now I have two sons and a third on the way, but at the time it was one kid. I was like, I saw the importance of him seeing me be physical, like physically doing work.
Mhm.
And because most of the people in my life didn't do physical work. Most of the people in my life were in front of screens for work, for social, for everything, even entertainment. Like everything was done in front of a screen. That's how I literally lived my life. And well, that's not true. Part of my business was actually networking and meeting people. But then COVID happened, and I was like, oh, I don't like this. I've
Mhm.
been in front of a screen since I was a little kid, you know, all that type of stuff. And as you guys do, we have our head on a swivel, and I was able to see that
Mhm.
what was coming down the road for a little kid wasn't going to be great. Now I'm not a strict, you know, no screen person. You know, my son has a Nintendo, and you know we give him, you know, an hour to 2 hours of screen time so he can watch whatever show or movie he wants to watch. You know, he's not 7 yet, so you know I'm not, I haven't put him on social media yet. um, but but what I'm hoping to be doing in the first, you know, 7 to 8 years of their life is to get them to enjoy being outside, get them to get used to being outside, get even be bored. Like if my son is bored, I was like, just go outside and just sit on a rock, you know, like just go, because that's what I did. I mean, when I was his age, I would, my mom would just send me outside, go play, you know, and I mean, it was as simple as that, you know, and uh, his imagination will let him run wild, you know. So that's that. Um, but I also don't think social media is, like Vincent said, it is a double-edged sword. And again, because I look at everything, I know that the youth of China aren't going through the same issues that we are, and they have the same technology we do, but their society instills in them resilience and uh, you know, bettering themselves. I'm not a communist, by the way. I'm very anti-communist, but um, they still instill in their people and their kids and their youth strength, resilience, um, doing for what they would call community, right? And and whereas over here, you know, our algorithms promote, well, well, see, this is where the double-edged sword comes in. But what I was going to say, so I don't edit myself, was the algorithm promotes poor behavior and victimhood and negativity, or hedonism, which is what would cause boys and girls to be like, oh, I gotta get this, I'm not living up, blah blah blah. And you know, so, but at the same time, my algorithm doesn't show me that stuff because of what I choose to pay attention to, right? So the algorithm only gives you what you keep asking for.
That's good.
Now the issue is with the common, what we, at least what we're observing from these documentaries and books and stuff, is most of the people are absorbing things that aren't better, you know, for their flourishing. And so, and they don't know that they can choose something different for their algorithm. They think the algorithm is controlling them, which again brings me back to my first point. Everything's coming from within. You know, it's like at some point, a person could realize, oh, wait, I could choose something else. I can choose something that makes me feel better. But again, we live in a society right now that promotes victimhood rather than honor and the uncomfortability of being honorable. It's way more comfortable to, you know, especially when you're rewarded for being a victim. You're going to choose victim all the time if you're a weak-minded person, and not throwing shade, just, you know, being objective in my words. But again, so I think it's incumbent on parents to just be aware that their kids are sponges and they don't know any better. They just don't. And so it's up to the parents to do it. But then again, most parents right now just aren't aware because they're so busy, and that, you know, they're just like, yeah, just watch the screen.
Mhm.
I get to make dinner. You know, it's like I just, because what our parents did when they were annoyed with us was go outside. Now what parents do is like, I'm annoyed with you, go watch a screen, and you know, and so you get what you get. I got in trouble. I used to do stupid things like I'm not. You know what I mean? Like when I would go outside, I got in trouble. So yeah, you send them to a screen, they're going to get in trouble because we're kids, you know. So
Yeah. I don't think there's necessarily anything wrong with the screen itself, but it's what are you consuming on the screen, right? And that's where I think parents can certainly be more engaged to help monitor and regulate whether that might be. The other thing you brought up, you talked about China and how the algorithm feeds them different things versus what it feeds us, even though they have the same technologies. But you hit one word I think is very key, and that's honor. And then the other word I want to put on there is respect. And
Mhm.
in some of those cultures, there's so much dishonor and disrespect if you do something that doesn't just reflect on you individually, it reflects on your family name, and so on when you do those things. And that in some ways I think is maybe gotten lost a little bit in here in the United States. Um, and we talk about that a lot, that accountability piece, that self accountability piece, to actually think, if I do this, what are the consequences, not just to me, but then the next layer and the next level, and so forth and so on. And I don't think that in our society that there's enough of that happens, to kind of help self-regulate is probably the best term I can think of to start to use, because it is, the technology is great. Having access to the information, as Vincent mentioned, is a good thing, right? But double-edged sword. So the self-regulation piece I think really has to kick in, and that's something we need to teach. um
Y-
the Go ahead.
It's interesting when you bring up the whole family culture, because
Mhm.
I think again, every culture has a component of that in terms of, do you honor the past, and how do you honor the past? Do you honor the future? How do you honor the future? And the Japanese culture, it's very familiar. I mean, you just think about the whole, samurai, committing, essentially suicide because you dishonored your shogun or whatever it is. And you think about all that multi-generational trauma that is still around. And then you look at today's data. You look at the fact that, yeah, they're not having babies. Uh, what was the new statistic that, uh, you know, people well into their 70s and beyond have to work because the society does not have enough support. You think about all this land and resources they have that no one's there, so they're attracting foreigners to come in there. They're trying to increase this. I mean, again, it's a double-edged sword in that same regard, because I, for one, had to work through a lot of that stuff, that was passed on from my great grandparents to my grandparents to my parents to me. And but that was the impetus for a lot of my own realization, is like, I don't want to pass a lot of that stuff on to my kids. It's not fair to them.
So let me ask, I want to throw one more thing on top of it here. Let's talk about communication, because I think that's another critical piece of resiliency and being able to push your way forward. Because obviously there's that internal piece of communication. We've already talked about that, but there's also the outbound piece, and being able to encapsulate and express how you're feeling, and share that, and trust that the person you're sharing is going to be receptive to it, and all of those pieces and parts. And I think it's twofold, because I want to look at this from both sides of the fence. One, we were just talking about the social media piece, and that has really, I think, impacted our young people's ability to communicate, because everything now is actually
Mhm.
preferably done through a text message or something, versus having a actual verbal interaction. So they struggle with that piece of it when they have to be face to face. So I think that's a critical component of it. And then just in general, whether it's while they're in school and you have a teacher, and that was the teacher's role. When you think about when we grew up, if you really had a challenge, you had a certain teacher you trusted that you gravitated to, you could go talk to them, and express what you're thinking, what you're feeling, etc. I don't think there's a lot of that happens today. And I don't know if that's because the receiver side is more closed, or the deliverer side doesn't have the skill set and the comfortability to be able to push it forward. So what are your thoughts on just communication from that standpoint, especially when we're talking about getting out of your own way and just being more resilient and being able to push through?
The image that came in my mind was I used to do I used to teach Chicago students theater and storytelling. Speaking of the hero's journey, I would be brought in as a not a volunteer. I mean, they paid me to do it, but they would bring me in to teach these skills: communication skills, storytelling skills, writing skills, and I hated it. I absolutely couldn't stand it because the students, they didn't want to learn, and the teachers allowed them to not want to learn. It was wild to me, and there was always justification for it.
Mm.
And I could see why. It's like once you get demoralized, what can you do, But at the same time, I'm like, who allowed the demoralization?
Mhm.
Because again, the kids don't know. There is a symbiosis between teacher and student at whatever level there is. So, you know, you, you have to go to the one, again, accountability. You have to go to the one who has the most responsibility and has the most authority. But in those situations, I found that the teachers, um, they had all the responsibility but had no authority, and the students had all the authority and no responsibility. And but all that said, as I was there, I found the diamonds in the rough. And those ones, man, I was their biggest cheerleader. I was like, oh yeah, keep going. That's awesome. Good job. Even despite the fact that the rest of the classroom is just like hovering over in like dark shadows.
Mhm.
Um, it was hard. It was hard for me because it was like I was every day I'd just be demoralized and just saddened by the kids that wanted to learn who were in terrible soil, if you will. And communication, uh, communication, it, it, having the freedom to express yourself is important. And if people learn that expressing themselves is going to be demonized or shamed, they become quiet and they either bottle it up, keep it to themselves. And I don't know if y'all know this, but when you just have all your thoughts to yourself, you'll go crazy. If you don't let like you're constipated and you can't release, you're going to be stopped up. And it comes out in pretty, it can come out in pretty unconstructive ways, deconstructive ways. Um, so funny enough, yesterday I, I I'll be honest, like the last couple of weeks I've been kind of depressed about what's going on in our country, and I was like, I don't know, this is ridiculous. And I was listening to a podcast yesterday, and like halfway through the podcast, they were like, we need more cheerleaders. I was like, oh, yes, that I love being a cheerleader. Yes, you're right. Like we need more cheerleaders. And the way they described it was this. They said there was this MMA fighter who one of his favorite things in the world is seeing somebody who has never lifted a weight before. You can tell he's never worked out before. It's one of his favorite things in the world. And he'll run up to him and give him a high five. Oh, welcome. You're awesome. Blah, blah, blah. Hey, 5 pounds. Yeah, let's go. Let's go. Right. And like teaching them like personal records and all that type of stuff. And I was so inspired. I was just like, I want to start an improv troupe here in my small community. Because me, I'm an old theater guy. And so I was like, if I can start an improv community and just get a bunch of new people in, I can cheer them on, and hopefully they get that resilience and skill, so they can their friends will be like, what's going on with you, what's, and they can be lifted up. And if you lift one up, you lift at least two others up, right? And so on and so forth. And so, um yeah, I'll leave it at that. But I think the whole communication thing can only happen if the people around you foster that, allow you to express yourself, and feel what you're feeling and all that stuff, and teach you how to identify what you're feeling and stuff like that.
Yeah, no, it's excellent. Thanks for sharing that, and that's so true. And as you were talking about, just observing, as a citizen of the country and just what's going on, and um, kind of feeling like sometimes your hands are tied, trying to figure out how can I best impact or help to make a difference, right? As you said, being a cheerleader is a great place to start. And like you just mentioned, you do it for one, which does it for two, and hopefully exponentially that continues to move itself forward. But I think communication, I think, is one of the key components to a lot of different things. Just because we, as society, we get so caught up in, I think, miscommunicating and misinterpreting what's truly being either said or shared, and that's twofold. One piece of it, I think, is not actually taking the time to care and to actually listen is one piece of it. Uh, and then a lot of us get stuck in our own quote unquote agenda. So we hear the pieces of it that we wanted to hear because that's what fits into our particular agenda or what the direction we want the conversation to go, and not actually respecting what the deliverer of the message was really saying. So we're only pulling out the pieces that fit our the direction we like to see the either interaction, the relationship, or whatever move. So that's the pieces and parts we take out of what they're communicating. So it leaves this divide, right? And so then you've now got this divide between individuals, then individuals become groups, and then now we are kind of where we are with what's happening with our country, because you have all these silos and nobody's willing to get out of their silo and actually hear and communicate, which is extremely challenging. I want to transition to one more thought here that I was just having. And
Oh, before you move on, Brian,
yeah,
you
absolutely.
made me think. Are you familiar with Stephen Covey?
Yeah.
Yeah, he has a book called Seven Habits of Highly Effective People. And one of those habits is to seek first to understand and
You
then
mean
to
this
be
one?
understood.
I got it right here.
Oh
Yeah.
wow. You have
Yeah,
a
I got it right here.
Leather
serious
bound
version.
edition.
Yeah.
Is it monogram too?
My
So yeah, I have
goodness,
that.
where's my copy? Oh no,
Yeah.
I gave it away.
Yeah.
Wow. That's
Yeah.
pretty
So yes, I
badass.
do have that is right here on my shelf. So yeah. But yeah,
So you do know what I'm asking.
yeah, he teaches a lot of great things to be aware of in that. And that's old school thinking. And when you think about, because it's been out for decades now, right? But it still has so much value and it can have so much impact. But I think you also have to be in a place of being open and receptive to the concepts and what's in there. What I wanted to bring to the table in addition to that, though, is just talking about gratitude, because I think that's another piece of it that it's really hard to even explain sometimes how we lose sight of just being grateful and showing some gratitude and being thankful for what we have accomplished, where we are, what we have, etc. And that's the other piece of it. So I can't blame social media only for that. I mean, there's a lot of other pieces and parts that go to that. Keeping up with the Joneses, as Vince mentioned earlier. So there's so many levels. But thinking of gratitude and all that encompasses, and then bringing that back to resiliency, how do you think those two things either play off of each other? Is it relevant? Is it not relevant? Do you think it matters or doesn't matter?
When y'all were talking, I was thinking a few things. I made some notes when Jerry was mentioning being a cheerleader. I'm thinking, too many times we're not cheerleaders for ourselves. we need to make sure we take time out and cheer ourselves on and encourage ourselves. I think we
Mhm.
spend so much time um, overestimating everybody else that we don't take time to really appreciate ourselves. And we wake up, we have gratitude, but I think it's healthy to also have gratitude to ourselves for surviving. That anything that we've been through, things that we've learned, maybe we've learned some things the hard way, but just to show gratitude and love to ourselves for coming this far and considering all that we've experienced. Um, we don't do that enough. We really don't. As far as you had mentioned resiliency and communication, um, we need to also practice, and I'm preaching to myself too, the subtle art of saying when somebody says something, we get to decide if we want to receive what they say or not. Not everything people say to us deserves our reaction or our response. Sometimes our response or no response is the response. Also, it's okay to say, no, thank you. Somebody says something, even in our households, that we're not receiving, it's okay to say, no, thank you. And it's okay to say, yes, please. We get to choose the people we want to be around with a lot of times. A lot of times you have control. Maybe at your job, you don't necessarily get to pick your team, but in social settings, even who you're around in your house, you can say no, no, thank you to a lot of things in your life. And by doing that, we get to control that mental space in here that needs protecting. Our brains need protecting. And nobody else is going to do that for us. Many of us were very fortunate to have parents that were protective, but a lot of people didn't even have that. So we really have to take it upon ourselves that we have to protect our own brain. And sometimes that's by just simply not being rude, not going back to tick to tat to go back and forth. Mm-mm. Sometimes a no response is the response. And sometimes you just have to say, no, thank you.
Vince, what are your thoughts when we talk about just gratitude, being thankful?
Well, along with ego death and all these other things, that was essentially the change. It's your mindset, it's your perspective. Um, you know, it's fascinating when you distill everything we've talked about thus far down to, how could you encompass it in one thought or one sentence or one word, which is so difficult. And learning to communicate and learning to be a good listener, they go hand in hand. um, and resiliency is such a fascinating component because it's what we all want in our culture, and yet the cultures to which we grow up are not conducive and supportive for resiliency for the most part. So, to me, it's really about that mindset of abundance versus scarcity. The idea of you change that negative thought or that negative impression or that, oh, I need, I want, I must have, versus saying I'm content. And I've just been having so many conversations of recently about the idea of making more wealth or generating more of this or that, and as I reflect on that, it's like, yeah, of course we need to pay our teachers more, we need to honor and appreciate and respect them. But my aha in the last, let's just say 72 hours is actually not that. It's actually not paying more because then you get taxed more. It's actually paying less, but having less expenses and being grateful for the fact because, it's, it's, I think life is really simple. And Jerry's kind of trying to live through this whole idea of having that difference of lifestyle from himself and for his kids, which is something that I also aspire to have as well. So I'm that's part of my own future planning, making things happen day by day too, is ensuring that I am transforming my mindset of scarcity into a mindset of abundance.
Very good. Thanks for sharing that, Jerry. He brought you up in that and talking about gratitude and how you're structuring some things in your life. How do you think that's relevant for resiliency and continuing to push through when the challenges happen?
Um, there's something my mom used to always say to me. Uh, I think it comes from scripture. You meant it for evil, but God meant it for good.
Mm,
And um, again, boiling back down to self concept, it's what are you accepting to be true? And so, either everything is working for you or nothing is working for you. Because if you look back on any experience that you've ever had up until now, like without that experience, you wouldn't be where you are now. Right. So that's what I'm grateful for. So I'm always grateful for now. Just like I wouldn't be here if those things didn't happen, good, bad, or indifferent. And that also tells me that the things that are coming to me, um, I need to be grateful for those things too, right now, because I know I wasn't grateful all that much 20 years ago, and I still got cool things. And I'm like, man, I should have been more grateful at the time. Well, goddamn, why don't you just be grateful now for the things that are coming? You might as well. So, it costs you nothing. So, a lot of times people say, oh, you need to have a gratitude list and this and that, which is great. But how often are people just grateful even when a hurricane is happening? And that to me is real resilience, where you can actually like be that eye in the storm. Despite all the things that are happening around you, you have this sense of stillness, of gratitude, and recognition, and all this stuff right here, right now, because there's never any moment other than right here, right now. And so when you actually start recognizing that, oh, that thing, that Bugatti that I want, let's say, right? Well, just be grateful for it now. You don't need it right now, so you might as well be grateful for it. And if you had it, you probably wouldn't be driving it right now. It'd probably just be sitting in the garage. You're not always driving your car. I'm just using that as an example. But whatever it is that you're looking for, if it's $1 million, like me, like, hey, I'm not gonna lie, I would love to be a millionaire. Um, I'm not, but I'm grateful. Why? Because it keeps me from wanting. It keeps me from, not wanting, but it keeps me from desiring, and it keeps me from um, getting lost in the, oh well, they have it and I'll never get there. You know, it keeps me from that attitude of mind that I'm not there yet. And again, this is all stuff that I worked through to get to this point. It's not, it's just a recognition that there's first principles and things, and gratitude is hands down one of those first principles. And but again, most of the time people think about gratitude and they think, oh, be grateful for these things that you have now. But it's like, no, be grateful for everything.
So, and that brings me back to a note I made here and just said, when is it enough, right? Because when you start thinking about accumulating things or getting the Bugatti, as you mentioned, so you get that, and then it's like, okay, now what else? What else? What else? What else? Right? And that brings me back to, I think, even when you start thinking about the Bugatti or whatever else you may need, what's the why behind that? Why do you feel that you even need this thing, right? I think that's a key component to really look at. Why is it important to you? Why is it relevant? And then once you do have it, what difference is it actually going to make in your life? Other than to go in the garage and go, well, I got a Bugatti, right? I mean, does it really, from a substance foundational standpoint, does it really change your life? And I think that goes back to what Vince was talking about sometimes starting to maybe minimalize what's really relevant and what's really important and what you want to have.
It's so fascinating when you talk to folks who've you know died or almost died or been on death's doorstep, and going back to gratitude, and then going back to what is each of our purpose Why are we here? um, what is it that we will leave behind legacy? And to me, I think one of the saddest things I hear is when a parent outlives a child. I think as all of us who are parents, that's a challenging component to think about. And so, a lot of the gratitude piece for me has been that perspective of learning, reading, listening to individuals you know, who are in a different position than I am, and when you realize your life could end tomorrow or next week or next year or whatever, your whole mindset of time shifts. I remember when the kids were really young, my partner at the time would talk about, it's like, having the kids sleep in the same bed, co-sleep. And my resistance, my program would be like, no, I want my own time. I want my own thing, this. And she said to me, she's like, Vince, um, when you break down how many days or how many nights they want to be with you, and you instead of going, adding up, you go the inverse. It's like the average time that your child wants to be with you, and you go downwards. You're like, wow. It's like just that scare, that mindset of like, okay, I need to maximize, I need to enjoy, I need to live and appreciate this, because one day it will not be here, or one day they won't want to be in the same room, or one day they don't, you're not cool enough. That's the whole thing. And that's a really big mind shift change. It's probably one of the hardest things I've had to deal with.
Yeah, I agree with you on that. And one of the best quotes that I've ever heard, and kind of in that vein, is talking about live each day to the fullest, or whatever people say about that, or
Carpe
live each
diem.
day like it's your last, because one day you'll surely be right. That's true.
Yeah,
I
yeah.
mean, it just is what it is.
I
Um,
would share that it also goes as to siblings. If you
mm,
have a sibling and there's a big age gap, and then when you're younger, they're always trying to follow you around and be with you, and you're like, really their hero. And
Yeah.
then you kind of get situated, and then you turn around and they're going off to college, and then they're starting their career, and then they're starting their families. Then all of a sudden they're busy, similar to having children, really. And then because my brother could come by my house and then stop in and whether pick up some things that I have or my mom sent for him, or stop in to say hello, and then I turn around and then he's ready to go. Like 30 minutes later he has to go do something adulting. And you remember when that little kid would always try to follow you around, they always want your attention. And I would, just like you're mentioning with parents, I'd say the same thing with um, people who watch, because I know some of our demographic is like what, about 24 to 30 to 24 to 40. A lot of 24 to 40-year-olds watch. I would say the same thing. Take the time out with your siblings too, and or those little cousins or god brothers, god sisters that would follow you around, because it goes very fast. And then you turn around and they're adulting. They're doing things like moving to Hawaii. So take the time out with your siblings too, and try to enjoy, the hour that they'll give you here and there.
Thanks, Erica, for that. And that's very true. So I want to move to what I'm going to call final thoughts. And this is where each one of us just kind of shares a golden nugget, if you want to call it that, with the audience. What would you like to share for them to take away, to talk about being able to just be more resilient and, push your way through when things are really challenging? Vince, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah. For me, in helping me get through my toughest times, I like to watch I like to watch like documentaries or true stories. I'm one of those individuals that I love watching old war movies, or you know gosh, Band of Brothers kind of things.
Mm.
But I also love to watch sports movies. It's a tearjerker for me, and it's because, again, that hero's journey, that perseverance, that getting through it, it fills my cup. So for those of you out there that are struggling, you're not alone. and finding others through your own journey and supporting this is going to be the best and the hardest thing for you, and accepting you're not alone. And there's so much support out there, and again, it's just being kind to yourself and just allowing yourself to get through this. And sleep, nature bathing, get out of your own comfort zone, take a trip, travel is the best medicine, period. I think if everyone traveled, the world would be a much kinder place.
Erica, what about you? Final thoughts. What would you like to leave our audience with today?
Watch out for your self-talk and pay attention to what you're telling yourself, and to be on guard for what other people are attempting to tell you. And if it's something that's not in alignment with what your self-talk is, don't be afraid to say no, thank you.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Don't feel compelled to react every time somebody says something to you about you.
I took a lot of notes and nuggets and stuff like that. But there's two here that I think go together, which is one, recognize that the world is always changing. It waxes, it wanes, it vanishes. Like the world it's ever changing. But that being said, when you're going through the thick of it, allow yourself, and this came from Erica, allow yourself to feel what you feel. Like allow yourself to feel it. Don't make it wrong. Don't make it right. Just feel it all the way through. And if you can allow it to be there and love it, I'm going to love you. You stay here, as painful as you might be. I'm going to love you because I recognize that I'm not you. Thoughts, and feelings. It will subside. Works every time. You when you really allow yourself to feel what you're feeling, not blaming, not shaming, not trying to make it worse. And I know this isn't easy. It's not the easiest piece of work to do, but if you get in practice of it, you actually start to realize that those are actually just your subconscious beliefs trying to come to surface. And your new self doesn't want to experience these things and wants to let them go. And until you let them go, they're always going to be there to show their ugly face. So recognize that the world changes. And to quote, and I'll end on this because I often think about this song, but if you want to make the world a better place, take a look at yourself and make the change. Simple as that.
Yes, amen to that.
Yeah.
Thank you, Jared. Appreciate it. So for me, it's this, and it's about goals, right? Because, we talk about goals, and that's a different podcast to talk about how to go about setting strong goals. We'll get into that another day. But I think having goals is one thing to help you kind of stay on course, right? Because things are going to come on, try to knock you out off your path or block your path, and being resilient because you know what it is you're actually trying to achieve or accomplish. And being true to that and staying focused to that, I think is a great source or resource to help keep you, standing yourself back up when you get knocked down and continue to push forward. Give you a great example, and everybody, it's a sports analogy, and I'm like Vince. I like to get into a lot of the sports stuff, but Kobe and Shaq didn't like each other. They never had a healthy relationship, and it was well known. And they talked a lot to each other and at each other. But what they did finally figure out through communication and at least trying to figure out how can we make this work was they had one common goal, and that was to win championships. So put everything else aside, how I feel about you personally, how you feel about me personally, can we get to a common denominator that we're both working towards? So if you do have those type of issues in your life and relationships and community or family, try to figure out something that's a common ground with that individual and let that be what guides you, because I think that's a very important piece. And that's how they were able to win those championships, is they figured out that, we both want that. How about we put everything else aside and make that what we're all about? And it worked for them. So that's my thought with that, is just to, get out of your own way from that standpoint. Be honest, feel it, share it, talk about it, and try to find some commonality, because that can give you a way to stay focused and continue to drive forward.
If we're going to like take that politically, right? And
Yeah.
build that connection point.
Wow. From a man who's running
That's-
from office one day. All right. Well,
Yeah.
yeah, it would be great if we could take that politically. Well, until next time, everyone, take care. You guys enjoy the rest of your weekend. And as always, say take care of each other. And we'll definitely see you soon. Bye now.